Hey everybody, welcome back to Keeping It Real with Tiff and Carl. I'm Carl Rabun,
I'm Tiffany Salcido.
and joining us today, we have another special illustrious guest. This is Dr. Rob Leone. He's a professor of human resource development at Idaho State University and co-founder of Black River Performance Management. He has over 20 years experience in leadership and organizational development and performance improvement, and is recognized for his unique human-centered approach in developing strong leaders in healthy organizations. He's appeared in numerous podcasts and featured in TD Magazine, and authored numerous academic publications, and several keynotes. His latest book, The Science of Strategy and Soul, showcases his original leadership models and unconventional practices that challenge traditional leadership development playbooks. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, friend, and one-time roommate, Dr. Rob Leone.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Tiffany.
I probably should provide some context on the roommate. Rob and I,
Yeah.
we both did our doctoral colloquials. Collo- what
Yeah.
are they? Colloq?
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
said it wrong.
Colloquiums.
Colloquium.
Colloquiums.
Yeah, colloquium.
Yeah.
Colloquial. Yeah, colloquium
Yeah.
together. A couple of them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I did. We
Yeah.
did. I was in Chicago,
I
then I
think
went to
three.
Anaheim, and then
Yeah.
yeah. But we spent the entire week in Orlando, Florida, in right around Christmas and New Year's,
Yeah.
and we had planned it out, and it was great, Tiff, and I got strep throat. And so I was sick as a dog the entire week. We did the whole colloquium, and he was such a a good roommate. He was. We walked to, I think, Bass Pro Shops out there, and took a trip on the Strip, and he did a bunch of different things. He didn't go with me to urgent care when I got the magic
Oh,
mouthwash, but other than that, I mean, he was a model roommate. Tiff, I just want you to know, if you guys ever need any help with accommodations while you're away, and Rob is in the vicinity, just holler at him. Man will take care of you. So
Thank you.
perfect.
so thanks for being with us. And we wanted to really, leverage your expertise and your knowledge. Um, you know, we talk a lot about leadership in a the idea of just leadership in general, but also in public sector, government jobs, and also specifically human services jobs. Both of our background is in human services. We were both social workers, and now we both teach for UC Davis Center for Human Services, where we do all the traveling around to different counties, working with social workers, social supervisors, managers, and really connect with them on that level. So, we always hear the idea of HR being important, but then also, oh, be careful, HR is in a room and everything else like that. So just wanted to touch base with you on that today. But before we get into that, just tell us about your journey. What led you to where you are now as a consultant, as a professor, and in those topics?
Yeah. Um, I've always been in the training performance space, the OD space. Even as a manager, I had high responsibilities, significant responsibilities over the oversight of that without really talking about it back then. So that was probably 30 years ago. Not quite that long ago. But as my career's evolved and it's taken the paths it's taken, I ended up in a number of graduate programs where I was teaching. And this theme kept recurring that I'd have these students coming in and saying, what we're doing here is really important. Yes, thank you. I'm glad. Like that's why they're there. But what they would also say is, and my organization needs help, or my leader needs help, or my friends or significant others organization needs help. And it just kind of snowballed from there. I've always dabbled in private outside kind of main career practice just because there's been some interest and demand, but over time it's really emerged and morphed into a really high demand space. And it's not. And so that's what's brought me out of the classroom a lot more. And now with our company, Black River, we're working with organizations in essentially every industry. So despite what I'd say probably conventional wisdom, and I'm not a conventional wisdom person. In fact, that's part of my playbook because I push back on that. They usually tell consultants play in one specialized space, dedicate your time to that space, become an expert in that space. Well, the reality is I'm an expert in human behavior in organizations. So that doesn't just mean healthcare or higher ed or government. It means people are all over the place and people are people. And because of that, we can understand how they work, what they need, what they believe, what their errors and mistakes and assumptions are. And so our approach is industry agnostic, context specific, so that when we work with organizations, we're really focusing on who they are, who they want to be, what's getting in the way, and then how do we become a partner in getting them to those areas of success that they want to be at. And so that's essentially where we're at now. And and that ranges from like HR offices and divisions to C-suite people that are in leadership to even you talk about human service sectors, or even nonprofits, right? Like, so boards will do board development, board strategy. So do all of these things based on what that organization really needs. And we're happy to tap out and say, look, this is not our expertise. But for the most part, if people touch it, if people are a part of it, we usually have a seat at that table because of our unique perspectives and what we bring to the solutions.
I am 100% with you on that because that's where I have, I think, the most interest is in the people part of it. And I don't think enough energy oftentimes in businesses go to the people part of it. It's really just the nuts and bolts of strategy and tasks and processes, which is also important. I won't lie, but if you have people working for you and you're working with people and for people, then that people quotient is so necessary. And I just don't see enough energy going into it. So I'm super excited. I've already got your website up and I'm free downloading stuff. I'm super excited.
Yeah. So, Tiffany, to your point, something happened a couple years back. We were running a board and executive retreat with a credit union, and it was pretty rewarding because we got to the end of the retreat window. It was over 3 days, and eventually the CEO sat back and said, it just occurred to me that we've been focusing so much, to your point, Tiffany, on task prep, training, capability to do their job, that we've left all these human aspect skills out of the formula, and that we need to be doing that. We need to be doing that for a couple different reasons. One of which, they will be more effective with the people they're working with. They'll be more effective. So I'm talking about peers and colleagues. They'll be more effective with whether it's stakeholders, clients, customers, whatever that group is that's interfacing with that staff member. And then, and we know this, the spillover is that they take that new knowledge, those new skills, those new perspectives and frameworks home after work, and they can integrate them into their life to be a greater agent of change in their life. And I'm not suggesting that their life has to change, but the more we increase our awareness, the more we have more agency over what it is we're doing and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I found just recently in probably the last couple of years because I studied organizational psychology as well. It's something I needed about, and I came into it just from working in less than healthy workplaces and thinking to myself, gosh, why does working have to suck so bad? It's not the work itself, but like the
Yeah.
energy that goes into being with people. Like, it doesn't have to be like this. There's got to be a different way. And so I'm finding even in my own work and, as I'm diversifying my portfolio into other fields, the thing that people ask for the most is, can you come in and help us find out how to trust each other, how to have healthy
Yeah.
conversations, how to let go of grudges. And there's just a constant theme with almost every request from every industry that I'm hearing from is we just need to learn how to talk to each other and get along. And I thought, gosh, what a
Yeah.
concept, what a
Yeah.
concept.
And what's interesting to me, so a couple thoughts. Number one, what my ambition is that people at the end of the day go home with enough fuel in their tank still. so
Right.
that they can be present with whomever or whatever it is they want to do, right? And how many times have you gotten home and you haven't been in the best shape for your friends or your significant other, or you wanted to go for that walk or hit the gym and you're just out of gas, right? And so that's where I really think our opportunity is, to your point, to really help people in this area. But there's a
Mhm.
flip side to this too. And most of these organizations where this is occurring, I think that's what everyone wants. They just don't have, first off, a shared common language to be able to talk about it. And then they
Right.
also don't necessarily have the awareness and foundation to know how to kind of steer that boat. Because, even the most gruff individual, crunchy personalities at times, they're often there for the right reasons. They just don't realize that what they're doing is disruptive or maybe dangerous or hurtful, right? Like, to
Mhm.
them, the script they're playing makes sense to them. The script makes
Yeah.
sense to the actor, or they wouldn't do it. And so they're often doing it with, often, not always, with really good intentions and motives. And I think we have to acknowledge that in people in order to really leverage and make these changes we want. If we approach this as, he's a jerk or she's super difficult and entitled, like, that doesn't help us in terms of kind of cultivating this humanity that we want in the workplace. Because the moment we marginalize or, subject someone to like that kind of treatment, is we start to some extent, distance ourselves, dehumanize, and it's so
Mhm.
much
Mhm.
easier to reduce them to something that they're not.
Mhm.
Yeah, 100%. And that's such a difficult one. I mean, especially since, like you mentioned, some people have the right have an intention that is well-meaning, and it lands on people with the wrong impact, right? And so, just based off of personality, both Tiff and I are, both DISC. We pay attention to DISC. I'm certified in Myers-Briggs, right? And so, just recognizing those task-focused folks as opposed to
Yep.
relationship-focused folks, and sometimes the task-focused folks don't always understand the impact they have on other people, and they step on toes. And oh, my admin said that you left upset. Is everything? I'm sorry if I offended you, right? Which
Right.
just piles on, right? But yeah, the human aspect is so important, especially when you're in a numbers focused organization. I was just having a conversation. I was teaching a class this morning to admin from different counties across the state, and one of the things they were talking about is, they always feel like they have to be 100% correct, and they have a standard of 90% of their work to be correct, right? Where I've had, and Tiff's had, and probably in her county, I don't know, what was your error rate in Merced or Riverside, Tiff? Because in Kern, in Bakersfield, it was 3%. I mean, you could only have 3% errors before you started having it affect you, right? And so focusing so much on those hard numbers that make it look like, that are supposed to be the determinants of your work performance, gets in the way of how you're providing that service, right? And it's such a powerful thing to think about. And it's kind of, I was, in one of your blogs you talked about onboarding. Tiff, I know
I read
Tiff's
it.
an onboard.
Yeah.
She wants to reinvent onboarding in human services, and just having that notion of treating treating onboarding like you would be sending somebody to a tropical resort, right? And helping people feel like they're in the right place. Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. What a hook out there right now, Carl, for people to be like, what? What are you talking about? No, the idea is that we've historically, and when I say we, I don't mean everyone, but a lot of people, and a lot of people trying their best, right? Have done onboarding in a way that really prioritizes information and not things that are important to people, right? So one of the number one aspects to onboarding or people's concerns when they're newly hired in an organization is socialization. Who am I going to meet? How am I going to be connected? Who's going to be part of my network? Who's going to be a part of my solution network? Things like that. And so many onboarding experiences sits people down. Someone was joking about this yesterday with me, sits them down in front of a video, which is has them watch a video of how we act here and how we behave, or, overview of benefits and employee handbook and policies. And all those things are important, but they're, and benefits are important in the sense of, especially if you're really that's an important aspect to your job and you need to utilize those. But that is not the focal point of onboarding. Certainly not if you want people to have a sense of the culture and the feel, right? So what I did was I wrote this article that looks at onboarding would be better served if it's more closely aligned with arriving to a new resort. When you get to the resort, they're not, unlike although the cruise ship does this, the cruise ship does the safety, where's your life jacket type of thing. But for the resort, they're pretty much, here's your cocktail, get going, have fun, let us know if we could help, get to know this person, here's the concierge, and really just removing barriers for people to fully immerse themselves quickly. And if we could figure out how to do that in a much more work-centric manner, I think our people would be much happier. They'll feel much more included and integrated. And there's nothing worse than someone going home at the end of the day and saying to their friends or significant others that, I don't know if this is going to be a good decision. You have people that start jobs highly motivated, so intrinsic motivation's high, lots of enthusiasm, a lot of energy. And in many instances, we quickly pull that out of them with monotonous and mundane types of functions. And so we need to really look at how we're doing this, why we're doing what we're doing, and retool it to do something that's much more aligned with what people need and what they want.
Yeah, no, and I've seen that. There's that stat that I think what is a majority of people decide if they're going to stay at a business long term in the first 90 days, right? And so
Yeah,
that, yeah, your analogy in your article was spot on because I've seen both sides. I've had
yeah,
somebody sit me down and give me a 3-inch binder that said operating instructions and said, "Here's your training." And
yeah,
then I've been part of a bank where we had a structured onboarding program based off of the people and their roles that they played and who they were going to talk to, and
yeah,
to have those overviews, introduce them to those key partners, and then give them time, an hour or two at the end of the day to do some of the required training. But it was a
yeah.
measured pace where people, yeah, at that bank, my very first day, I went to a Cheesecake Factory twice. My my unit took me to lunch, and then I got connected with one of the business partners I was going to work with, and he had a project he was working on for the next week. So he took me out again to Cheesecake
Yeah.
Factory. So I always tell, I said, that's how I knew I was in a good place. I went to Cheesecake Factory twice in a day. So, but just that level of connection, really, it really does make a difference. It totally resonated with me. That's why I wanted to elevate that. So,
Yeah. So as we know that there's a life cycle in terms of people's enthusiasm and intrinsic motivation as it relates to work over a period of time as a new employee. And we know that it's really peaked and high early on and that it starts to wane naturally because they're not feeling like they're getting their sea legs in the job per se. And what I mean by that is just think back to a job you took and that 6 months in you're like, man, I should have stayed in my last job. That was at least fun. And I felt like I was on top of the world because you were fully
yeah.
competent and it was working out well. In this new job, what you're realizing is your enthusiasm, energy, and interest is starting to wane because it can't stay full all the time, but
Yeah.
your level of competence and proficiency is not catching up to offset that. So there's a lot of doubt that sets in.
Yeah, it's that J curve, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just yeah,
So I want to nerd out for just a second because what I also think about with the onboarding is really connecting like how we onboard or how we bring people into organizations, very similar to like Erickson's psychosocial stages of development, right? So thinking about in those beginning weeks or months, really starting to develop trust. Like this is what it looks like. Here's how you fit in. Here's where you're safe. Here's how, like really kind of setting the stage for people to be successful, and knowing that they have that system of support available to them, and then going into like where do you have some autonomy? You're learning, you still don't know all of the ropes. So here's what you know, and here's where we're going to keep developing you, but we want you to take some risks and try new things.
Yeah.
And then again, building that confidence and that belonging within the group. And I have to say, one of my biggest gripes with the way that many organizations onboard now with the policies, the procedures, and here's all the rules and stuff, that's the last time they ever see it. It's the, here's the employee handbook. And then when here we are 2 years down the road, we're like, are these really the set expectations for how we behave here? Because what it says in the handbook is definitely not what we do in real life. And so the only time that the handbook comes back is to be weaponized for
Yeah.
discipline or
Yeah.
some, and
Yeah.
so that doesn't work either.
Yeah.
That
That's the
doesn't work
problem, right?
either.
Either it doesn't match with the organizational culture, or well, you read this in onboarding. You went through this. Okay, that was 3 years ago, right? That's the last time I saw the employee handbook, right?
Well, even like the code of ethics, I do a lot of ethics
Yeah.
training, and I always ask organizations, do you have a code of ethics? And people are like, do we have a code of ethics? And where is it and who has it? And they're like, I think I signed something when I got hired 27 years ago. Let's look that up. So is it
Right.
really something that's helping shape behavior and shape the culture and shape the identity of your organization if you see it once and never look at it again? It has to be part of the norm and the conversations that we have and the guidance that keep us going in the right direction. Otherwise, it's just words on a paper.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get kind of overwhelmed as we talk about stuff like this. And I see this even when we just do, whether it's leadership or methodology training, stuff like that. And people are now like, oh, I got to know all this and I got to do this all with all my people. And then you stack this stuff on it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Goals, values, systems, things. But, it's not everything and all the time. And what we also know is that if you put your time in, and build relationships and know people on a more personal level. It doesn't mean it needs to take a lot of time. It's a little bit more time on the front end, but then it pays for itself over time. Then these other things become a lot easier to talk about, a lot
Right.
easier to integrate. I think one of the big challenges. So I'm on this soapbox right now about trying to move organizations into a leadership ecosystem framework where the organization buys into a strategy as it relates to people development, people performance, things like that, that's based on kind of really curated models, practices, and approaches instead of having everyone just kind of do their own thing wherever they want, right? And fact I get is, well, I don't want to micromanage my leaders. I want them to do what they want and how they want to do it. And that gives them autonomy and that's good for them. And the challenge is, autonomy is great, but then it's also an overextension at times. And for a lot of people, they really aren't that well versed or educated or informed in the leadership space. Just because something's worked for you in the past, and this is one of these like bias, right? Just because they worked for you in the past doesn't mean they're going to work for you in the future. It's one of the biggest challenges with books I see in many instances where these leaders or even keynotes for that matter, just do what I did. This is how it is, and this is how it worked. There's so much context that goes into why things work the way they do, right? So classic example is a leader that says, no, I don't need any help. We're great. And when in reality, I know exactly what's going on to a certain extent behind the scenes, and they're not great, they're not healthy. It just so happens to be that they have a cohesive culture that's helping and taking care of it, the system that's kind of protecting the leader at that point. But then you have one of those key players disappear and you bring in a new player, and then all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart. And so you go back to the leader and you're like, well, where is your magic then? Right. And it's just my point, and I'm not trying to kind of marginalize anyone or demean them, but my point is that we often do things that seem like they're working and we're not necessarily sure the accuracy of that statement. It's kind of like someone that
Yeah.
builds an employee feedback or employee satisfaction survey that doesn't know how to properly do test item construction. And then they're like, this is our engagement survey. This is our employee satisfaction survey. See, things are working out well. And there's inherent problems and flaws in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see that. I mean, just I've been in organizations where there was 87% engagement. And I also knew, historically, the Gallup national engagement survey is somewhere
Yeah.
between 30 and 35%. I'm like, that's a little skewed, right? And so
Yeah.
how are the questions How are the questions broached? How much trust, how much psychological safety do
Yeah.
people have to be able to say this is a true answer, right? And so yeah, it's definitely an issue. But talking about that idea of autonomy and neglect, right? You talked about, another article you had, the difference between what autonomy is and how it can too much autonomy can be neglectful, and that we give it out. I like what you said. It's not entitlement, right? It's not a virtue. It's situational, it's earned, and it should be applied with intention, right? Which really took me back to situational leadership, right?
Hmm.
And interacting with people where they are, rather than having just that one style of, well, this is how I do it, this is how I was taught, right? So I was told, well, I didn't have that when I was young. Well, cool, but neuroscience really wasn't a thing until maybe about 30 years ago. So, so the stuff that we've learned now, I wish my boss had known when I was starting out. But now that I do know it, we can grow, we can learn, we can get better. Well, but our brains want that homeostasis, which, causes those challenges. But, just what you were talking about, the idea of being autonomous. I do a lot of 360s, right, through LPI, through the leadership challenge, right? And so there's 30 questions that leaders answer, and then it gets sent to their direct reports, their colleagues, and their managers, the same questions, and they're supposed to rate that leader on the frequency that they use that stuff. So it's not about your skill set, it's about the frequency that you use it, right? And historically, predominantly, the one of the lowest, if not the lowest score of the 30 questions is one that involves asks for feedback, and regularly asks and receives feedback. And I hear people all the time, I don't understand, but I have an open door policy. People, they know I'm approachable. They come and talk to me all the time. And, but there's a difference between having an open door policy and asking that pointed question in a structured, that's why we talk about one-on-one meetings and how important those are,
Hmm.
right? That's You can still cultivate autonomy and have that structure and boundary of checking in, and rather than saying, if you need any help, let me know. How many people ask for help?
Right.
That's one of the problems with our society. We don't ask for help. We figure things out for ourselves. But if we were to say, what are you working on this week? How can I support you? That's a different way of asking the same question, where we might get a bet answer that can be beneficial to both parties, right? So it's such a challenge, right? You can, well, I let people do their jobs. I'm hands off. I don't do anything, but
Yeah.
yet your unit is suffering in ways you don't even know because you haven't checked in, right?
Yeah. Well, and and the question of how can I help, or what questions do you have for me? People at different development levels can answer that. So you're
Yeah.
people that are fully prepared, sufficient, competent, can actually answer that question very well.
Mhm.
Your new employees, and this is the one of the big fatal flaws, right? You hire someone new, you're like, hey, Carl, so glad to have you. You're going to do great. I really believe in you. Here's your name tag and your keys. Let me know what questions you have. And you're like, okay, sounds good. But the reality is that you don't know what questions you do or don't have, because you're just trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I often talk about this in terms of how the ego complicates this, and that if you as a new employee, if I was your supervisor and you as a new employee, you had questions, you might actually self-censor yourself in the sense of, I don't want to ask Rob these questions because I don't want to be perceived as unknowing or unknowledgeable. He took a chance and hired me, so I need to do everything. And so we're starting to create
Yeah.
this self-imposed pressure of, I need to know the answers. I need to figure this out. And in many instances, and we see this a lot, people end up creating a lot of problems through mistakes or lost time. And sometimes we find it swept under the rug or in the closet when they leave, it comes falling out. But it's a complicated situation, and it's really easy and convenient for us to say, look, I just, people need to advocate for themselves and tell me what they need, and that's how I roll. And a little bit of a cowboy talky type of approach to that doesn't actually serve anyone well, because even that person, if they took time to reflect upon that, they had needs, and maybe they rolled up their sleeves and figured it out, and maybe they're resourceful in certain aspects and it worked out well. But you're not resourceful in every aspect. At some point, you're new at something, and at some point, you need to ask for clarification, demonstration, feedback, whatever that is, in order to grow. So we see it a lot. Once again, I stack that layer of well-intentioned on there, that people are
Mhm.
really trying to be well-intentioned, but it's complicated by a variety of different variables.
I agree. I agree. And it's nuanced and it is complicated and everybody's different and there's no one right answer. And where I come from that leadership perspective is to get beyond I think I know and I'm going to do this, but really replace that with curiosity. And the checking in without being the micromanager. For me, I'm autonomy is probably my most important social need. I do what I want and, and I do it my way. But I do like structure, and maybe that's a paradox, but I like to have structure or know what the outcomes are. And so sometimes when I'm giving instruction or I'm leading, I think in that same way. And I have to really get out of that mindset of some people might need a little bit more, some people may need a little bit less. But let me be curious enough to ask, how do you receive information? How often should I check in? You know, how often do you want to check in? And see if we can find that sweet spot for that individual or for that team. But it takes time and it takes patience to figure out that right spot. But there's no one right way. And I think what challenges a lot of workplaces is that they think that they have to be equitable with everybody. Everybody has to be treated exactly the same way. And we want fairness and we want people to have equality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody gets the same thing because they may need something completely different.
Absolutely. And but here, this also circles back into that ecosystem comment I have, is that it's tough for us to carve out time to figure this out.
Right.
Unless this is something that really geeks us out and makes us really interested about our role as a leader, this is not something that's intuitive. And so how can the organization, how can the system build a framework very similar to the onboarding piece? How do we curate an experience that that is essentially like, an agenda and a tour guide as opposed to nothing at all and people self-sourcing the solutions, right? Because people are busy. They have a lot of things going on. And we see this, we bring them into training and then they leave there and they're like, that was interesting or that was good, but they never adopt or integrate any of that for a variety of different reasons. But one of which is that we don't create the space or make it easy for them to pick it up and integrate it into their practice, and therefore they just move on without including it. And I think that's where we have an opportunity in our industry to really make some difference. And it's hard. Like, it's easy to go and deliver training. It's hard to build a system that augments these experiences and that prioritize certain pieces so that they're integrating and stacking in a way that really makes it easy. And at the same time, how do we do this and maintain people's autonomy and independence to make decisions, right? So there's a lot to be figured out here in this space.
That's one of the reasons I leaned into coaching. As an instructor, it's great to introduce concepts and models. And I think I've always inherently used the coach approach without really knowing it, because that's, again, how I process information is give me some info and let me think about how it applies and how I can bring this to life. But what I would see, especially we have some customers that we see over and over again, they request the same topics, the same classes every year, every time. Hey, come back and do emotional intelligence again. I don't know if they got it. Well, the problem is that I can share that information. I can give you info, but if there's not a system in place or
Yeah.
some ownership in place to really change the culture of the
Mhm.
organization, then you're wasting your money. But keep giving it to me. It's, I,
Yeah, I know, right? It's a real interesting rub there, right?
right.
I
So
don't want
keep
to say
giving me the money.
no,
Right.
but
Yeah, but
yeah,
If it
that's
was
where, yeah.
easy, if it was easy to
Yeah.
integrate, we wouldn't have jobs. So
Right.
yeah.
So this is where coaching really became interesting to me because I thought, what would it look like to be able to say, here's the framework, kind of like what you're saying, here's the ecosystem, here's the language, here's the models that we can relate to. And now we can have further conversations one-on-one in teams to kind of coach you through implementation, coach you through mindset shift, coach you through putting the new systems in place or how to navigate through the unknown. That's where I really start to see progress. And so as I kind of develop new leadership programs, I'm making sure that that coaching is a part of that. So that it includes here's the instruction and here are some sessions for coaching after the fact to really kind of work with people to figure out what does this look like in real life instead of just here's this great handout that I stick in between the console and the seat of my car to never be
Right.
seen again, you know?
Well, the problem is you can give these wonderful models, have them practice the models for a couple days, and then you're gone, and there's no accountability
Right.
for transfer of learning, for upholding, or even course correction. If people aren't used to it and they go forth and they don't prosper, then well, we already had the training, so what else are they going to do?
Yeah.
And so it's really like you said, building that time into the training proposal, not even just training, but just the entire program. I mean, Rob and I, we both learned, Phillips ROI evaluation in our program. But I very rarely have seen organizations that I work with get to even level 3
Yeah.
evaluation of are they using and applying what they've done. Most
Yeah.
people, it's, hey, did you like the training? Did you like the instructor? Was the room okay? How about the lunch? And then a pre and post test. And
Yeah.
then, oh, well, we trained you. Go out and do wonderful things, right? And like you said, it takes a certain intentionality, and to include it into an ecosystem. I mean, I was part of a culture change at a bank for 1,800 employees, and it was a year and a half process where it was consistently inundated, where we had the consultants in, where we had training, where at least 30 to 35% of the staff were trained in it, had, multiple opportunities to train it. The senior leaders reinforced it and would come down and have conversations just off the cusp, you know, talking about those things. And so it was something that was super intentional, super involved to where it created that tipping point. And I love what I do and I love helping people, but I tell people all the time, well, look, you want this done. I don't know if I can do that in a 3.5 hour training.
Right.
I said,
Yeah.
I can give you some ideas. A full day training, I will take those ideas from the half a day and have you work on each one. But that may be a tenth of what it is that is important, right? And so devising those not just training opportunities, but interventions, learning interventions, which involve outside the training room, those conversations with leaders, one-on-ones. I hear it all the time, pushback. I mean, we give specific one-on-one, here's how to do it. Here's a model. Here's a couple models. Okay, great, but I don't have time.
Yeah.
That is a culture thing. That's a culture thing, right? That's a societal thing. Those who um, don't have time to do anything else other than work. You don't take your breaks, you take your lunch. That means you're a hard worker. And that's our society,
Yeah.
right? So the work culture, I don't have time to do these things when very often it's the backbone of how you are able to have more time in other places is to allow your staff to grow and have that capability to do more on their own and to be truly autonomous when they're ready for it. Those are the things that really matter.
Yeah. We don't have time not to take a break, right? And
No.
to your point, Carl, you're talking about 3 hours. I remember, with different potential clients and actual clients, they're like, well, we have 45 minutes. What can you do in 45 minutes? And it's like, are you serious? Like, if that's the level of the attention span we have, there's, I'm not sure what you expect to get out of this. And so we do need to take a pause. We need to reflect. That's why we take vacation, or we should take vacation, is to step away and let, parts of our body heal and regroup and gain clarity in other places. And I have a number of these coming out where we're up in this last quarter where we're doing work sessions that we're away. We have work to do. We have to build for the future, plan for the future. And they understand that you need to take a break. You need to pause. We need to prioritize this in order for our people to be able to understand this, ask the questions they need to understand, um, have non-pressure, small-sided conversations about things that are a little bit more casual and kind of open-hearted, as opposed to transactional like we have in the workplace, where people are just, if they're still on site, they're just passing each other in the hall and just trying to get what they need out of each other. So it's really important. Like I said, we don't have the time not to take the time.
I agree. I agree. And you know, one of my famous phrases is you're going to spend the time now or you're going to spend it later with interest trying to clean up
Yeah.
the mess. And so how do we really get proactive and be thoughtful about the environments that we're creating and the way that we communicate with each other and what behavior do we reinforce and what do we need to nip in the bud? And it requires a level of courage or
Mm.
vulnerability. I don't want to get all Brene Brown on here, but I will because she's so I love her. But you know, it's like you have to be a bit of a risk taker. And you know, we've talked about generations and the way that workplaces are kind of shifting for the newer generations, and it just looks much different today than it did say 30 years ago or even 20 years ago if we really think about it right before COVID, where people have for so long their identity is tied to what they do. Their identity of who they are and what they are is really tied to that achievement, their work, and you know, even as adults, my generation, when we meet someone, oh hi, nice to meet you, so what do you do for a living, versus what are your hobbies, what's your life's like, we don't really have those types of conversations, but it's shifting, and I'm really optimistic and excited about this shift where work is becoming more purpose driven and people are starting to seek out that work life balance. You know, I heard you earlier, Rob, and I'm with you 100%. My mantra is always like, let's make work a place where you can come and earn a living, do the best job you can, feel engaged, feel excited about it, and then go home and live your best life, where there's equilibrium in those two things. You know, unless you're independently wealthy and you work for fun, all of us have to do it. Um,
Yeah.
and so if we have to go to work, we should be able to do it in a space where it doesn't deplete all of our ourselves to where
Yeah.
we can't enjoy the time with our families, with our children, with our neighbors, in our community. Like that's such an important piece. And I'm sure all I won't, I'm not a research quoter. That's Carl's job. I just have little fun facts. But you know, research shows that people who are happier in their personal life tend to do better at work and vice versa. And this idea that we can leave our problems at the door, I think is such a false statement
Right.
because you're one whole person. If you're struggling at home, it's inevitably going to find its way to your workplace. If you're struggling at work, it's inevitably going to find its way to your home life. And we have to find balance in both of them. And a lot of those people skills, those relationship skills are transferable. So um, I know for me personally, I always say training is always an intervention for me. Like training always comes as not as the trainer, but as the trainee. When I get invited to a training, it almost always is because I absolutely need it and the universe is speaking to me. And I got invited several years ago to be part of a group. We were doing world class relationships for work and home. That was what it was called, and it was part of an employment services thing that we were doing, trying to help people navigate work relationships. And I was in the middle of like almost telling my husband to kick rocks. We weren't married at the time, but it was like, I think we're done. I think we've ran our course. And so as I'm learning to like train the trainer in this series, I was like, oh, I'm the problem. Oh my gosh, right? Like all of the issues that we're having are me. It's all me. And so even though it was a work training, I learned so much about my personal life that I could go home and make amends. And now we're here we are years later living our best life, hashtag goals, um, for all of the things. But it takes again, I think too with training, people being open to the information and thinking about how it applies to them in a personal way, because that personal way allows you to apply it in the workplace as well.
Something you said there, if I could just kind of raise maybe devil's advocate perspective,
Yeah,
you're talking about, um, people coming in and the role, the job is kind of the means to the end for life outside of work, right? As opposed
right.
to in the past, its identity's been highly aligned with the work. Here's my concern. my concern, and it's not that one's better than the other, but we are continuing to move towards a more individualistic framework and self-centered framework. And when we prioritize ourselves over our team, because your work for most of us is a community-centric activity, right? But if you are compartmentalizing it as in, how does this get me what I need? And you have that attitude, very individualistic as opposed to collectivistic, then we are going to damage the organization in a different manner, right? Now, the other side of it, the high identity, high alignment, was also very individualistic in nature. So I'm not saying one generation and era is better than the other, but there's a fear on my part that we are continuing to move away from our community roots, and distance and remote working is fast forward of that in many instances because it creates more transactional relationships instead of deeper, richer relationships. And so I think there's a really important conversation that needs to be had here that's not being had. That as we look at these different interests of different groups and generations, that we really look to determine what's important to us as an organization and how do we hire accordingly. I spent a year studying this on my sabbatical, looking at more community and collective centric frameworks that actually come out of cultures, and they have relationships to organizational citizenship behavior research, that if I'm more concerned about the us and the we, I'm going to take care of us differently. I'm going to prioritize our team and our interests before my own self-interests. And I think it's important that we're aware of this concept and this practice, because you get people that come in that don't buy into that. And if you don't figure out how to screen that out during the screening process, if collectivism is important, now all of a sudden you have someone that doesn't fit. And so if you really prioritize this community approach as an organization, I talked about organizations as communities, micro communities, as opposed to families. I think families are too dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Um, that
Yeah.
if I make a bad hire in a leadership role, that's someone that's highly driven and individualistic, they're really not going to be able to step into the roles and the values that we espouse as an organization. So there's this need to be careful around and aware of how people are interacting with that work experience, because they're not tied up with their identity anymore. It's very clear. But the trade-off is that this is something that they get for themselves and then they move on. And when we when we do stuff like that, we create distance, emotional distance from the thing that we are supposed to be servicing. And it's a lot easier for us to take liberties from. And here's some research that came out a number of years ago. So, which speaks to this, is that organizations that are high in community service are at risk for greater levels of um, internally deviant community behaviors. And what that
We
means
work in
is,
human services. We know.
yeah, that
We know.
I've been treating other people well, or I've been giving to our communities well. I don't have to, I could take one for me here, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So,
I
Look
concur
at
on
all
that
that I do for
100%.
look what I do for here. I
Yeah.
can do
yeah,
this because
yeah,
I built that equity, right? And it's not a bank,
exactly,
right?
right, exactly.
Well, I agree with you on all of this, and I'm all about we're a we are a we, and what we do and what we don't do has a tremendous impact on all of us together.
Yep.
And I thrive personally. I can't speak for anybody else but myself. I really thrive in environments where even though we might be working independently, we have that common goal and we communicate about it and we celebrate it and we have conversations about moving closer to whatever our purpose is. And this is why I'm really excited about like a purpose driven community where we have those conversations and we have that collective identity. I still want people to feel like they can take care of themselves when they need it. But when you're really centered in that community-based environment, people will let you know if you need to take a break. People will care
Yeah.
about you enough to be like, you know what, Carl, I think you should get some therapy. No. or
You should
or
take a long weekend, an extra
yeah,
long weekend.
you know what? I'll cover
Okay,
for you
bye
this
everyone.
afternoon. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll cover for you this afternoon. Take a break, but and we can forgive and we celebrate that as well. That collective nature. Um, but I do agree with you that in the virtual environments, it gets really hard when we're communicating mostly through email or Teams messages where we don't have the benefit of tone and body language. I think that makes it more complicated, not impossible.
Right.
Um, but
Some people do it really well, but they
right,
also have, whether it's training or perspective or integration into
right,
what the standard is, not
right.
just, well, just because my friend works remotely, I should work remotely.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. And not everyone works better. I know people that I work with um, who they're they have colleagues that are working remote 3 days a week, and they said I can work 3 days a week if I want, but I'm not as good remote as I am in
Yeah.
person. So I stay home 1 day a week, right? And so,
Yeah.
but they also have that understanding where their manager says, okay, well, it's a flexibility. But then I've also worked with other managers say, no, everyone has to do things the same way because it's equitable and fair, right?
Yeah.
And so that lack of flexibility is really a challenge, like you were talking about, and it doesn't get into we can be individualistic as a collective, right? So how do
Yep.
we get a team of people, individuals who all have their own desires, hopes, dreams, ideas of what their best life is, and get them to function as an efficient and effective unit, right? That is productive and also, experiencing high levels of engagement, right? And